Welcome everyone to Double Canopy. I'm Joe, and today I have with me Timothy Treuer. Is that how you pronounce it? Treuer? Okay. And Jonathan Choi. Tim has a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from Princeton and is a recent Gund postdoctoral fellow at the University of Vermont, currently working on a mix of research and writing projects related to nature-based climate solutions. John is a JD from Duke Law School and current PhD student with the Duke Marine Geospatial Ecology Lab. That sounds cool. Geospatial Ecology Lab. What's that?
Yeah, so we mostly take a look at a lot of data that's produced by scientists in the field or through satellite data, and we're trying to knit that together in a way that allows us to make broader claims about, this is generally where humpbacks tend to migrate up and down the eastern Atlantic, or, this is generally where we'd expect to find North Atlantic right whales. Doing a lot of that synthesis work using data from satellites and things.
Cool. And Tim, you are working on a mix of research. I know you just got back from a trip to ice fields in Canada. Was that a part of a research project or just for fun?
No, that was just a for fun trip. I might write about it a bit as kind of like a trip report sort of thing, or a piece about hut to hut systems through mountains and places like Canada, Alaska, and the Alps. Mostly it was just a for fun trip. It was my first real foray into like glacier travel backcountry skiing, where you have to wear a harness and rope up and like be
Wow.
aware. But it was a really really wonderful extension to winter.
Yeah, it's already warm down here. I'm in San Francisco Bay Area, getting warm every day. So as I was saying earlier, this is the project that you guys worked on, almost how many years ago? 5 years ago? You wrote a paper in 2017. It's called Low-Cost Agricultural Waste Accelerates Tropical Forest Regeneration. Now, for people who don't know about that, can you guys tell us about it?
All right, so I should have reviewed a little bit more. Back in 1998, there was a restoration project that happened in a little part of Costa Rica known as the Área de Conservación Guanacaste, or the ACG, the Conservation Area of Guanacaste. And there was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and his wife, Dan Jansen and Winnie Halwex, who were trying to think of a way to, fix up some of these old abandoned cow pastures that kind of dot the area within the province and in a lot of Central America.
And these are centuries old pastures, right?
Yeah, so there's no way to like actually go back and document all the way through like colonial records, but the general understanding is they've been there for a long time.
Yeah, I talked to Dan, and he swears up and down our site specifically. There's no reason to think it wasn't just like grassy cattle pasture going back to like the 16 or 1700s.
So that not only do you have soil degradation from the cattle or whatever's on there eating the grasses, but you have compaction too, which is I haven't studied that much, but I understand it's a pretty big problem. Compaction of the soils.
Yeah, we might get into that a little bit more later, but that is something that we found is that this treatment with the orange peels that we're going to talk about like actually did decrease soil compaction. But it's hard to say exactly what the specific biggest challenges are. It's kind of just a whole basket of things altogether that seems to be delaying the return of forests in a lot of these areas. But in other areas, not so much. So the Área de Conservación Guanacaste has been cited as the largest tropical forest restoration project in the world, and a lot of it is on these former cattle pastures that are spontaneously regrowing. But at the same time, there were other areas within the same system that weren't recovering on their own. And so there was this question in kind of the mid-90s of, okay, what are we going to do about these lagging areas that are having a bit more trouble? And that's sort of what set the stage for this experiment.
And what was the experiment?
So the idea was back in 1998, there was this orange juice producer that was right across the street from where we ended up doing our research. And what ended up happening is this company, Del Oro, uh, had all of this waste that they were producing as just a byproduct of the work they do, right? You take an orange peel, you take an orange, you juice it, and then with the leftover orange peel, they actually squeezed out some of the those like natural oil that orange rinds have, the stuff that makes your house smell nice when you're cutting up oranges, and the stuff that goes into, orange-based cleaning products. So what you had left was this kind of nutrient-rich, dense, pulpy thing. And Dan and Winnie were looking at this pulp and said, this might be usable as some sort of an agricultural waste byproduct that could be really great fertilizer. And so they went ahead in 1998 and they ordered, I think it was, 1,000 truckloads?
Yeah, so yeah, I think so. The dates, I think they approached the company. I believe it was in originally they approached them in 1996, and then in 1997 is when I believe, or late 1996 or early 1997, is when they did the initial experiment, Modulo Uno, which was 100 truckloads. So yeah, still over like 1,000 tons estimated of these orange peels. Yeah, and then dumped it in I think it was a quarter hectare, so less than an acre site on this degraded cattle pasture inside the ACG.
Yeah, even at that size, less than an acre, that much material is probably mountainous, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's pictures of the sites, and it's a lot. It's a lot of orange peels. And so, yeah, that was just the initial trial. So they wanted to see, okay, what's going to happen if we put this stuff out here, with the idea being that there was probably at least one species out of the estimated 375,000 plus in the ACG forests that would come out and love to eat some orange peels and would go through the otherwise expensive process of breaking down these wastes into something that's break down the orange peels, get rid of the orange. And they did that initial trial as a kind of a proof of concept to see what would happen, and then that led to the 1998 contract, which upped the ante to 1,000 truckloads a year, and which they spread over 3 hectares instead of a quarter hectare.
Right. And was it seasonal? Because I know they're not picking oranges every day, but was it like 1,000 truckloads or whatever it was per year at a particular time of the year?
Yeah, I believe they were targeting the kind of the start of the rainy season just to give everything the best chance of breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I believe the idea was that it was going to be a big annual. They would do a big annual push, which I think was timed to the harvest season. But I don't know. Maybe John's learned more, but I feel like I know less than I should actually about cultivating oranges in Costa Rica. Dan and Winnie would be the ones to ask about some of these things. I was 10 years old when this happened. John was even younger. So, we came in a bit later into the story.
So they dumped 1,000 truckloads, 100 at first, and then 1,000 more on Modulo 2. And what happened?
So it turns out that there is something in the rainforest that will eat orange peels. And so a lot of these orange peels really started to decay. And this is kind of where the scientific question gets murky, because the question of what is actually the driver that's causing, the grasses that are there to die and then to allow for trees to come back in. Is it, soil compaction? Is it a lack of nutrients? Is it the fact that the soil can't hold on to the water? Is it that the grasses shade out any saplings? It's really hard to tell kind of what is the exact reason why these forests weren't coming back. But whatever happened, it seemed to work. And it's at around this time that there was actually a big court filing. I know I'm an attorney, but I can't read Costa Rican law. And so I'm not going to pretend to really know any of the details of what happened. But at the end of the day, what happened is that the court said that they couldn't keep going with this contract. They couldn't continue to have these orange peels being placed on the ACG, and so as a result, we got to modulo dos, but we didn't have modules 3 through 20, which is I think what the original contract had said.
Oh, wow.
Was that they were going to keep doing this and keep seeing if this works and allow for this really cool time series to happen. So that never ended up happening. But what we did know is that there was some soil surveys, I think in 2004 by an undergraduate from Belmont College, Laura Shanks. She's one of the co-authors on the paper. And then I went back in 2014 with Tim, and we were tagging trees and taking soil samples, and so those are the kind of data points that we have.
The lawsuit, from your understanding, what was the motivation? Were they really concerned about the forest, or jealous of the attention that Del Oro was getting? I in the paper it wasn't clear, and the articles I've read about it, it was like, why would they want to stop that? I mean, it was a rival orange juice company, right, that did the lawsuit?
Through proxies, I believe, is the story. But yeah, the motivation for the lawsuit, I think, came from this rival company. I think it's maybe more speculation than anything else. I don't know if this is like a concrete, you can link it to quotes in the public or anything, but it seemed pretty clear that there was either jealousy or concern that their chief rival in the country was going to get a competitive edge on them because they weren't going to have to pay for these expensive waste processing services, and in fact that they were on track to get all these kind of gold stars for sustainability as a result of this project, and this rival company didn't feel like they seemed like they were going to be at a disadvantage. So, yeah. But that again, somewhat speculative. It's hard to. I don't know if there are direct quotes that you could really pull them down on that.
So with the original contract with Del Oro, was there any money being changed hands, or because I know they were working on a processing plant to handle whatever waste they had. This bypassed that, so it seemed like a huge boon to them to be able to do something like this.
Yeah, they were. So the original idea, the original contract was an agreement for Del Oro to give. They own this still like forested land on the edge of the ACG, and the deal was they valued that land at a certain amount, and they were going to donate it to the park in increments every year, as the contract was carried out. And eventually, if they did run out of land and wanted to keep that contract going, I believe it was going to turn into cash payments of whatever the equal amount equivalent to however they valued the land. Yeah, so that's where the win was for the park in their eyes originally, because they didn't know for sure if they thought that there would be this restoration benefit potentially, but what they knew for sure is that they were going to get more land to protect, to incorporate into this park, and it was. Pretty unique. It was like on the slopes of this volcano, and it may have had unique species not found anywhere else. So they were really excited to incorporate this land into the broader protected area in exchange for doing this waste processing service for the company. And actually, it was a really innovative contract in another way. I believe they framed a lot of they incorporated the services that the park provides these orange groves, including, watershed, water management that the trees, that the forest is just naturally providing. I think there may have been some mention of pest control services or things like that. But it's, it was really a rare kind of ahead of its time document where this company was like in the contract was recognizing all the value that this protected area provides their company. Very unique in that way. Unfortunately, did not stand.
Right. That does sound like a very unique contract. There's probably similar things with big farm sites, big ag farm stuff here in the States, but not, obviously the waste stream I've never heard of anything like this situation.
Yeah, in some of the discussions that we would think about, we always thought like, oh, it'd be great if the Supreme Court of Costa Rica could read our paper and keep allowing this experiment to continue even if it's 20 years later. But yeah, it was a really unique kind of this policy question that tied so intimately to restoration ecology.
And so I'll get back to that, the outcome of that contract later, but I want to talk now about the beginnings of it. I keep imagining Jansen and Holwick's sort of considering this wild idea and having some trepidation. I mean, seemingly a lot could go wrong. And I know the paper mentions some of the critiques of leaching pollutants into the groundwater, pathogens in the soil. I mean, you name it, a lot of things could go wrong. I'm sure they were thinking about that and worried about it.
I'm sure that they were definitely thinking about it. I am not convinced that Daniel Jansen is capable of feeling trepidation. He's a very interesting character, and I mean, he knows more about the dry forests of Mesoamerica, probably the forests of Central America, like period, than probably any other human alive. He's a legend in the field of tropical ecology for good reason, and he's been working down there for forever. Even by the 90s, he had like probably a 30-year track record of publishing in the area. So if anybody had deserved to be confident that this would work out and it was a good idea, it was him. But the whole idea of like having the smaller scale Modulo Uno and then following that up with the bigger Modulo Dos was to test out some of these things and make sure that it wasn't going to cause serious problems. There were concerns, and that's why they structured the project the way that they did. But I think my suspicion is that Dan at least was very confident that this would work out the way that he thought it would, and I think probably for very good reason.
I mean, at that scale too, it's just having confidence that would work. It's pretty awesome. What was the worst case scenario? I mean, what could have gone wrong with this stuff? I mean, could you see? I know the what was it, D-limonene, the compound in the orange peel that they were concerned about leaching into the groundwater.
So I think in terms of like the worst case scenario, neither of us are, water chemists. Neither of us do that kind of work. My understanding is D-limonene is just kind of like oranginess as a chemical. It's not that there isn't really a human health risk. I think the thing to think about is if you can imagine walking around these towering piles of slowly decaying, fly-infested, maggot-infested orange peels, and thinking about doing that on somewhere in the US equivalent to like Yosemite or Yellowstone, even if it is being directed by a bunch of ecologists that have a sense of what they're doing, you can imagine that it doesn't look the best.
Right.
And that, there are a lot of potential things for that to go wrong, right? Like if there's a heavy rainstorm and a big clot of that stuff goes down river past, someone's house, like that can look really, really concerning. And so I think that was part of that worry, was, this kind of, public perception of what was, ecologically really helpful, but perhaps not the most visually appealing at first glance.
Yeah, I agree with John here. I think the biggest challenge that they probably knew that they were facing and did ultimately face was just the optics question. In terms of just kind of thinking more broadly about like what could go wrong if you're dumping a bunch of organic waste on a site and expecting nature to do a lot of work for you. Yeah, I think John nailed it on the head that like there's potential issues with leaching, especially with a big rainfall event, and that actually did happen. I believe that a hurricane, kind of a freak hurricane, hit the area in 1998, and was part of the reason why they were able to. My understanding, this is secondhand, thirdhand coming from me, but my understanding is that part of why some of these readings of D-limonene levels, why they were so high, is because there was this like freak heavy rainfall event that like washed a lot of the stuff into the waterways that they, much more than they were expecting. They had a berm on one side of the site that was supposed to protect the local stream, and I think some of it just got overwhelmed because of the freak rainfall event. Things that to be concerned about in general are kind of these ecotoxicology questions, like are these, in this case, oranges, but in other cases, like other agricultural products, are they being treated with chemicals that could be harmful if they flow into the local waterways. People at the time were concerned about delimiting, but that was kind of a hack job, to be honest. That was there was like there were concerns raised that it was carcinogenic. Even I think based on like one very old study that it was maybe poorly done or had since just like got a weird result and had not been replicated. But you can order delimiting on Amazon right now by the kilogram basically. And there's subsequently there's been papers about like testing its ability to actually fight cancer. Ironically, they were claiming it was a carcinogen at the time. Looking at those other chemicals, compounds that might be running off, kind of more broadly, even just like if you nutrient load a lot of inland waterways, you can cause problems with things like algal blooms and things like that. So it's important to try and do these things carefully, monitor everything that you can, try and set up the project in a way that it's that there's not a lot of risk of runoff. Oh yeah, and then at the end of the day, kind of cross your fingers that you're not going to get a freak hurricane that disrupts all the precautions that you put in place.
So if I understand, if it was right next to like a major waterway or big creek or something, it might have been a bigger problem.
I think there's more potential for it to be a problem. The site was next to a stream. Modulo Uno was not. I believe that was further removed. But Modulo Dos was kind of close to a stream. It had a nice riparian buffer on it, so there was like a good wall of forest between the orange peels and the waterway. And they built this berm. They took some precautions, but I think there was an issue with the hurricane, is my understanding. But yeah, it's in general, like, unless you're talking about like organic wastes that are coming from municipal solids or like feedlots or something. If you're talking about like manure, like then you get a lot more, I think, health concerns with this sort of thing. With these orange peels, I think the chief concern should have been things like herbicides and pesticides, like residual herbicides and pesticides that might have been on the orange peels themselves, but that wasn't apparently not a concern at the time by these groups that were trying their best to find any problems with the issue. All that they could find that seemed to go wrong with the project, even though there was this freak hurricane, were these elevated levels of delimiting. That's really what they zeroed in on, and it's just such a red herring. Like, it just wasn't the issue they were claiming it was.
They didn't complain about the flies?
My understanding was that they really zeroed in on the delimiting, but that did figure into the bigger optics issue, which may have been really what kind of swayed the public opinion in Costa Rica about the project. Was just there was this sense, and I believe in some of the legal language there was a accepted claim by the litigants that a national park had been sullied, was the English translation that I heard, and that I think the flies figured in pretty heavily to that. It doesn't. I mean, at first blush, like, dumping a bunch of organic waste inside a national park sounds pretty jarring. Especially when you say, it's going to be covered in like the most maggots you have ever seen in one place at one time.
It was probably unrivaled, right? I mean, I can't imagine some bigger maggot pile ever.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Was this the largest maggot pile that's ever occurred in history? I don't know, maybe.
Okay, we have giant piles of orange peels. Flies, I'm sure, quickly move in. You talked in the paper about 2 species of flies and a mix of different species of fungi. Were there various types of fungi? Did you see all kinds of different things growing in there?
I was 5 years old.
5 years old, yeah.
In suburban Chicago. So, a lot of that early information kind of comes directly from Dan and what he told us when we met with him in 2013, 2014. I guess it was 2014.
And when you met with him, did you fly down there?
As part of undergrad, we do this thesis that is this big old research project that you kind of do, pseudo-independently going into your senior year. And so as part of that, I got funding to go down for a couple weeks with Tim, and just kind of romp around the field and figure out what to do. Um, and so while I was there, we were both staying at the Santa Rosa National Park field station, which is where Dan lives. So we got to talk with both of Dan and Winnie about the whole process, the whole project, and look through some of their old photos.
Yeah, and I met Dan and Winnie for the first time in 2010 after I graduated from undergrad, and spent 3 months working for them as like kind of a field technician in Santa Rosa, and that's where the Orange Peel project first hit my radar. But I didn't go out to see the site until it would have been early 2013 is when I went back down there as a PhD student at Princeton.
So you're on your first trip, you didn't even see it.
Yeah, my first 3 months down there, I didn't get out to see that site. No.
And what did you think about it when you heard about it?
I mean, it sounded fascinating. I was super curious to see how it turned out because Dan and Winnie had visited the site off and on over the years. He had sent he's trained this amazing, incredible team of, he calls them parataxonomists, and they know, a lot of them didn't have a lot of educational opportunities. A lot of them had to drop out of school pretty early on. But they're just incredible taxonomists. They know as much as anybody else about what is living in the forest down there. And so he'd sent one of these people who was a plant specialist, so there was like I think maybe probably 5 or 6 years in the first 5 or 6 years of the site, he had these lists of the species that were showing up. And so he kind of, they tracked it enough to know that these tree species were coming back, colonizing the site. It wasn't being taken back over by grasses. They knew that it had been a success, but it sort of like hadn't really been studied in much detail. And so I was super curious. Even in 2010, I thought like, oh, it would be really neat to go and visit the site and do some sort of survey of how the recovery has gone there. And then in 2013, I went out to try and visit it. And the first time that I tried to visit the site, I was actually unsuccessful. I had just sort of gotten verbal directions from Dan and Winnie about where it was, and I think they'd said there was this big wooden sign marking the site. It should be very obvious. And I went out on my own, and I actually couldn't find it, or at least I didn't think I had found it. And it turns out that the forest had come back so vigorously and had formed such a complete canopy. It really was, like, just looking at it from a distance, it was hard to tell the difference between the site and then the forest, the older forest around the stream buffer. And so I found the field, I found the big pasture where the site was, but I didn't positively identify the site on that first trip. I had to go back, get better, more detailed.
So even at that stage, there was no evidence of orange peels or detritus. It was just
by 2013 there was zero. I mean, there's zero evidence by 2013 based on the photos of the site. I think there was zero evidence of orange peels within 6-8 months of when they were deposited there. It was fast. It was within that first rainy season that all evidence of citrus had disappeared, aside from the rich black loamy soil that was quickly getting colonized by a native plant species.
Incredible. That is incredible. So that goes back to another question I had about the flies. I'm imagining colonies and just millions of flies going crazy. I think you call it a fly orgy in one of your tweets. How quickly did those fly populations come back to balance?
So that exact timeline is probably known to Dan and Winnie or nobody. But it seemed pretty clear just based on the photos that the flies went through that radical boom and bust, and that by the time you're looking that it was reduced to kind of a rich black loamy soil, the flies were back to the levels probably that they would have been naturally.
Incredible. So I imagine a lot of, you had the trees and plant species come in, but also other insects eating those flies, small mammals maybe eating flies. You mentioned too other animals besides just decomposers eating the orange peels. What were those critters eating orange peels?
I mean, I think it's kind of hard for us to know like exactly which species were eating the orange peels directly versus like, eating the maggots or the other things that were attracted there. But something that we did try to do is we tried to do some audio surveys to try and figure out what bird species were there. Unfortunately, the two sites that we were comparing are like on top of each other. And so if you set up the audio recorder, you really couldn't. It was hard to say like what was coming from the forest and what was coming from the pasture. I think something that we took a drone photograph with one of our collaborators, and it's literally like the two sites that we compared are 6 feet from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like the transects are further away that we actually collected the data, but they abut each other, and so we had difficulty discerning there. And then we also tried to do a camera trap, which is a camera that goes off every time something goes by, and it's just we didn't that was more of a pilot study than anything, but we weren't able to find much. The one thing that we did find was the first time Tim and I both went out there, because if Tim couldn't find it the first time, I sure as hell wasn't going to be able to find it the first time. And so we went together to visit, and I think we were just standing around within the orange peel site, and we saw, was it a tyra?
Yep, yeah, it was a tyra. Yeah. Oh, I almost forgot about that. That was great.
I don't know what a tyra is.
A tyra is I think it's in the weasel family, but it's like this really cool, like, kind of medium-sized carnivore that they, they're like a kind of an odd-looking creature, but they're a really cool member of the fauna of those forests of Central America. And yeah, they're not. I don't think they're very common in the pastures. So I think it was only showing up because there was this nice canopy above it there,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very auspicious start to John's field work down there. You don't see a tyra every day.
You guys started your work, and it sounds very. How long did all the research take before you wrote the paper?
Yeah, and it's a story that begins when I was 5, right, with Dan and Winnie coming up with this project, and the idea to carry it forward, and it took a couple decades to pass, and I was sitting in David Wolkove's office. He's the professor for both Tim and I, and we were just like pitching ideas, and this came up just as a thing, and I was like, okay, that sounds really cool. And so I think it was a 10-week field season. I went down there. There was one day of mad dashing everywhere to get soil samples, because I didn't want to like let too much time pass for soil moisture and things like that, because if it rains, then all your data is different. And then we collected. I spent so much time just collecting tree diameter measurements along these really long transects. A lot of times it was.
And this is just you by yourself?
Yeah. So there are two funny stories that came out of that. So the site is very close to the Costa Rica Nicaragua border, and so as a result, there's a lot of questions about illegal immigration that happens in and across that border. And there are two separate occasions in which Costa Rican police officers accosted me with weapons, because they were doing border patrols, and they're like, why is there a mysterious backpack by itself on the side of the road leading into a trail leading to nowhere? So my feeble attempts at Spanish were clearly recognized as not being from Costa Rica or Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was some cool independent field work to get to go out there by myself.
Did you have a car, or would you get picked up? Okay.
Well, so that's another funny story. So I immediately arrived in Costa Rica. I don't think Tim had gotten a ride to meet me at the airport, and then we were going into the nearby town where you were gonna pick up a motorcycle, right? Do you remember this?
Yeah, that was the summer that I bought a dirt bike down there as a field vehicle for myself. Yeah, and we might get in trouble with Princeton for for exactly what went down, but we're both graduated. It's fine. So they had a rule: undergrads were not allowed to rent cars for themselves, and so the car was in my name with John as the second driver. And then he ended up being the one that used that for most of the summer to get between the researcher dormitories in Santa Rosa, and then out to the site, which was it's like what is it, like a 40-minute drive. You're commuting a lot today.
Yeah, so my day would start, I think breakfast was at like 7 a.m. And then I would like pack up the car, be on the road by 8-ish. And then I would do like 4 or 5 hours of field work until it got way too hot. And then I'd come back and, read and enter in my data and things like that.
Awesome. That sounds fun and exhausting and hot. So when you wrote your paper, that's probably when I heard about it, because it did see quite a few articles written about it in different science journals and even some popular ones on the web. Gosh, I mean, I don't know if you've done a count, but there was quite a few, at least a couple dozen maybe. How did it, because not every paper gets that kind of distribution. How did that happen? Did it just catch on? Was it viral within the academic community?
So the Princeton University Press Office, and I think actually specifically the School for International and Public Affairs, their press office worked with us to put out a press release for the study when it was coming out, and I think that's really what the journalists that covered the story latched onto. Yeah, and I think there was sort of like rippling effects where people would read some of the initial coverage, and then we get another round of interviews. But it was, flurry of calls that week. I was back in Alaska when the paper was coming out. John, I don't remember where you were, but it was funny just being. I remember doing a call from the stairway of the Anchorage Public Library with a reporter from I think it was Scientific American. They had a short podcast that they did. They did a story about us, but yeah, and also we had presented at a couple of academic conferences, and word had gotten out a little bit from that. John, I know you had been talking to a reporter beforehand that had seen your presentation at was it the Ecological Society of America conference? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that press coverage happened April, May of 2017. And so I was in the middle of like wrapping up my work and deciding where to go to law school. And I was just like, I am not press prepared. I've never done this before. But yeah, it was quite a flurry. And I think, it definitely felt like there were waves of like, oh yeah, like Upworthy would publish our thing, and then we'd get another wave of requests.
Yeah, or not requests. We some of the stuff that went the most viral, like they just never actually interviewed us. They kind of just made up things, pulled a couple of quotes from the press release, and like, yeah, I think the single most viral piece of media that came out of that our paper was a Facebook video that got like tens of millions of plays, and the like tagline of it, the title was "Orange Peel Save the Amazon," and yeah, we were in Costa Rica. Amazon was over 1,000 miles away, and there was a 3-hectare site, and they claim save the Amazon.
That's hilarious.
And the best bit about that thing is they had like a couple of the photos from our paper interspersed between just like generic shots of tropical deforestation.
B-roll.
Like, what? Yeah, it's like no one used a chainsaw in the 1600s to clear these cattle pastures, but this is the B-roll you guys are going with, so okay.
It's hilarious. Oh my God. They got to fill their segment with something. So I know we're running out of time here, but I loved your paper was really easy to understand. For someone like me who's a layman, I'm not a scientist. Your last paragraph really struck home. So I'm going to read it here. You wrote, when agro-industry produces nutrient-rich but costly to dispose of waste streams, there is an opportunity for low-cost or indeed cost-negative, scalable, biodiversity-friendly, carbon-sequestering ecological restoration. Given that the scale of biodiversity-friendly restoration activities is typically limited by cost or by socio-political prohibitions, as is the case described here, the results of this management project suggest this general approach should be widely trialed in a variety of settings using a variety of agricultural inputs. While the agro-industry may well be aware of these wastes could serve to achieve biodiversity and climate mitigation goals via accelerated forest regeneration, as this study underscores, achieving positive outcomes requires outreach on the part of restoration ecologists, as well as favorable regulatory regimes. So I heard about this orange peel jungle, and I thought, let's do this all around the world. Let's regreen the deserts. Let's save the soil in every degraded corner of the world, of the earth. But obviously, there will be pushback for these kinds of projects that will happen in the future. I don't know if nothing's like this happened since, right?
There has been at least one other project that was directly inspired by this one that took a really similar approach and had similar successes. Also, coincidentally, in Costa Rica. But some researchers named Zach Zahawi, Rakan Zahawi, goes by Zach, and Rebecca Cole had a really great follow-up project where they found that they could achieve similar results in southern Costa Rica in a rainforest, degraded rainforest area, using the flesh around coffee beans. So coffee is like this little berry, and we just pull out the beans to make our coffee. But that leaves behind this little fruit with a little bit of sweet flesh and skin and stuff. And what they found in Costa Rica was that that stuff wasn't being used very much, and they were able to get a large quantity of it and dumped it on a really degraded field near a rainforest, and found that it was able to suppress the grass, and when they did it in kind of a sufficiently large area, it suppressed the grass and brought back all of these native forest trees on their own.
And it was because they heard about this project and were inspired by it.
Yeah. And to be clear, I think they had heard about the original, they had heard about Dan and Winnie's work in the 90s. They had already put the gears in motion when we were still collecting our field data. But I think they were heartened to see when we got our publication out that we had success. And I think that galvanized them to keep pushing forward with their project.
Wonderful. I'll have to look that up. I don't know if anybody's written about it. But
I just put the link to the journal article in the chat.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, it did. I don't think it got the coverage it really deserved, but it was a really, really cool study. And I've actually, just full disclosure, I've been working with the two of them in a postdoc from Bolivia on just sort of a follow-up project, looking at like, okay, could we scale this? Is there really this like coffee? There are these like organic coffee byproducts around that are going to waste right now, and could we be using it for restoration in Latin America? Mm-hmm. So I guess stay tuned for a follow-up publication about that. But.
Awesome. So if this kind of thing was attempted in the United States, just in your opinion, brainstorming, what would be the legal strategy and what kind of partnerships would work best? Like private landowners with like a local ag company? Yeah,
there's been, there was somebody sent out kind of tentative feelers suggesting that we apply for some funding to try and do something similar in Florida with citrus specifically. Obviously, Florida oranges are a big thing. And there's a lot of initiatives in Florida. Seems to have the right climate for trying to attempt something like this. Hot, humid, good conditions for breaking down organic wastes. And there might be potential opportunity for a partnership. I think what it needs to look like is a partnership between researchers that are really going to look carefully and make sure that there are no unintended consequences ecologically, and that the project is set up carefully. So it's a partnership. I think it needs to be a partnership between a private entity, especially like an orange grower, orange juice company, something like that. Researchers that are going to do a really good job setting it up carefully, and then I think in the U.S. especially, there's going to be a real need to engage with government officials to make sure that that any applicable rules are being carefully followed and that any needed permits are being issued.
Well, I know in my local area, my city has declared emergency on climate change, and I'm wondering, everybody has climate goals, mitigation goals, sequestration goals. This is 100% tied into with that. I wonder if we could convince people that this kind of thing is, being a little looser with expectations of fouling up an area or something for a short period of time, if that makes sense.
Well, so I think what's really important is to remember that this project kind of addressed one very big issue, which is that in the area that this study was conducted, there was grasslands that we were trying to convert to forests that were not going naturally. And so I know within this part of North Carolina, for example, that isn't the issue, right? There aren't these persistent grasslands. It's that the forests that are converting are supposed to be fire maintained, but we aren't lighting fires. And so, right, like we have to be careful to identify issues where that is specifically happening. And I think the other thing, and this gets to your direct question, is that we can only ask for so much flexibility if we aren't going to be willing to engage with people directly, people in communities. I think the last thing that we want to encourage anywhere is this kind of mentality that scientists are going to plop in from nowhere and they're going to set this thing up and not tell anyone what's going on, and then they'll come back to monitor it later. I think this kind of a project is particularly full of opportunities for that kind of community engagement to work with the community and say, like, look, we know that in this area we're having these problems with creating forest from grassland. Are there any particular locations where this kind of an experiment could be really helpful to the community in question to produce this kind of a forest?
Yeah, that's John really nailed it there. So something that I think could be really exciting to see in Florida specifically is there's a major grassroots effort championed by a group that I think is called the Florida Wildlife Corridor Project or Foundation or something like that. And they're putting a huge amount of effort into trying to establish natural habitat that creates a corridor for species like the Florida panther and the black bears down there. That creates like this continuous habitat all up and down, from the Panhandle down all the way down to the Everglades, and something like that, where there's a lot of momentum and a lot of local buy-in to create that corridor. You could see something like this being really effective, where you have a landowner with a piece of pretty degraded pasture that wants to restore forest. To create, help create these ecological links. I could see something like that being a really effective place and setting to try and do a follow-up to this in the United States.
Cool. So I have one more question, and we're just about out of time. John, I know you're in marine ecology now. Has there been any similar, even small-scale experiments on ocean ecological restoration using ag products or some additive to some area that showed a vast improvement?
There's none that I'm specifically aware of. I think so. The first is that I study migratory ecology. I don't study restoration in the ocean. So, ask me about an Arctic tern and I'll dabble along. I'm pretty early in my program.
Okay.
I do know that there is some instances where oyster reef restoration is pretty big, especially here in North Carolina, and then further north in the Chesapeake. With the idea being is that if you can seed the beginning of oyster beds, oysters are so tremendous at filtering the water that they can be immensely helpful in improving water quality. They're also very tasty. And then I know another thing that I believe it's some researchers at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, or VIMS. I think they were doing some work with seagrass restoration in the Chesapeake, where really the limitation isn't ecological. We would call it dispersal limited, where it's, the seagrass just needs to be spread there, and it'll grow. It's just that the nearest source for seagrass seeds is too far away.
Interesting. This project's a particular kind of thing, but everybody understands composting. It just occurred to me. I was like, I wonder if you could do something like this in the ocean, and for seaweed, kelp forest, or degraded coral reef or something. Just adding something unprocessed, and letting nature do its work. I don't know.
John will know way more about this than me, but a lot of coastal waterways, the challenge is the reverse of these degraded terrestrial habitats, where you have too much nutrients running off from farms and golf courses or whatever else. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely nutrient limited ocean ecosystems that you could change pretty quickly with a little bit of input. The thing that comes to my mind that's very controversial, and I'm not endorsing it at all, is the ocean iron fertilization experiments. So there's a lot of ecosystems marine ecosystems that are seem to have most of the right nutrients to be very productive, but they're not very productive. And it may be because they're missing this key ingredient of iron. And so there's kind of these, I would say I don't know, John, I'm sure you know more about this, but I'd say it's still a fringe idea. But there's this idea that you could put a relatively small amount of rust, iron oxide, into that water and cause big algal blooms and big boosts in ocean productivity. Again, very controversial. I'd rather stick to putting agricultural waste on nutrient depleted terrestrial land for now, but it's an idea that's out there.
I think the thing that drew me to marine ecology is that you take a lot of the issues that happen on land, and then you put it into an ecosystem where everything is so connected because of tides, because of currents, and you can't monitor it at all because it's too deep. Someone said that fishery science is easy because it's just like studying trees, except you can't see the trees and they move. And so, I think it's definitely a challenge.
Well, on that note, I think we'll end it there. If you guys want to plug your Twitter handle or anything.
Sure, yeah. If you want some nerdy tweets every now and then, you can follow me. It's just my Twitter handle is my last name, so at Treuer, Treuer.
And I feel like I mostly tweet about law or nothing of real consequence, but mine is at JONJCHOI.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you talking with me today, and maybe we'll do it again one day.